Hello and welcome to the Dawson's podcast. I'm Aubrey Dawson, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Katya Hills, Managing Director at the Watch Register, part of the Art Loss Register. Katya, how are you?
Hi, I'm very well, thank you. How are you, Aubrey?
Really good, thank you, and thanks very much for joining us today. So Dawson's has recently joined the Art Loss Register, and I thought it'd be a great opportunity to have you onto the podcast, have a little bit of a chat with you, see what you do. I'm sure our viewers will find it of interest.
Perfect, great. Looking forward to it.
So tell us a little bit about the Art Loss Register's Watch Register in particular, and how you work with the watch trade.
Yeah, absolutely. So we launched the Watch Register in 2014, so nearly 10 years ago now. And the reason for that was that we saw that we had quite a substantial amount of stolen watch data in our database already. And as the Art Loss Register, we've been going since 1990, and we've been gathering data on lost and stolen watches and providing a due diligence service to the trade for that whole time. So we wanted to launch it as its own separate service dedicated to the watch trade. So we've been providing specific watch checks, very fast-paced checks within 5 minutes to dealers, pawnbrokers, anyone looking to purchase a watch either in a store or online, as well as online sale platforms. And the reason for that is that we want to make it as easy as possible for people to check watches at the point of transaction when a watch is moving hands. And we've also introduced a new service for those traders, which allows them to also run checks with us by text message or WhatsApp, because very often watch dealers are on the move or at trade shows. So again, we want to make it as straightforward for them to be able to do those checks just before purchasing a watch.
Perfect. And what types of organisations are members of the Watch Register?
So we have major online dealerships, so platforms that people might be aware of, like Watchfinder, Watchmaster, Crown and Caliber, for example, as well as a wide range of pawnbroker stores. So chain stores like H&T or cash converters, prestige pawnbrokers, and then auction houses as well who check their watch sales with us. So that will be everything from the very top end of the market, so Christie's, Sotheby's, Bonhams, Phillips, regional auction houses, of course, like Dawson's, and any other very small traders or runners. We want anyone to be able to access the watch register. So really, no matter how big or small you are, you can still use the service.
Brilliant. So it's a really vital resource to ensure that the watches that are being sold are not stolen, that people have good title to sell them.
Exactly. Yeah, that's our aim.
So obviously we've seen huge growth in the watch market over the last few years. Why are luxury watches such a target for thieves?
So watches are very portable. They're small. They can easily be moved away from the scene of the crime. And they can also be taken across borders very easily. So no one's going to raise an eyebrow when they see a watch on someone's wrist going through security. So they're also very high value. This is a luxury asset that is very much of interest to buyers. The pre-owned watch trade is booming at the moment. And also those watches can be very easily resold. So they retain their value on the pre-owned market. And very often, in fact, watches can be sold on the pre-owned market for 2, 3, 4 times the value of brand new. So there is a very good return there for thieves. So they're able to sell them on quickly, and they really capitalize on that velocity in the watch trade, the fact that watches are bought and sold very quickly from one day to the next, so they can distance themselves from the stolen goods very easily. That said, watches do all have a unique serial number, so that does make them highly traceable. And as a result of that, it does mean that we're able to identify them very quickly after the theft as well, because obviously every single transaction is another opportunity for us to find the watch, because the trader, either the buyer or the seller, will be checking the serial number with us. And at the moment, based on last year's statistics from our recoveries, we found that third of the watches that we found were stolen within a year of the theft, and a quarter within 6 months. So that just goes to show how quickly actually they're turning up, and therefore how relevant the leads are that we can provide to police on the sellers of stolen property.
So it shows how crucial those serial numbers are. So if you come across a watch that has either a missing serial number or a tampered serial number, it's a real red flag.
Exactly, yeah. Stay away from those. And in fact, it's actually quite surprising that they're not tampered with more often. I think because the thieves know that they would automatically drop in value. So they leave them intact, but what they do is they try to sell them on as quickly as possible to distance themselves from them.
Before the theft has been registered.
Exactly, yeah.
And in your experience, which watches do you find are most likely stolen, and what are the reasons?
So definitely Rolex watches are by far the most stolen brand. So that constitutes a third of our whole database. And it's primarily the men's sports models, which are most in demand there. So sort of the, status symbol, chunky watches, very high value. So the Submariners, Daytonas, for example, or GMT. But we have also seen over the last sort of 2, 3, 4 years in particular that thieves are becoming very astute, and they've cottoned on to the trends in the market, and they know which watches are experiencing, or which models in particular are sort of experiencing stratospheric demand and have these very long waiting lists of anything up to 10 years. So they're also looking to get their hands on those particular models. So for example, the Rolex Pepsi or the Patek Philippe Nautilus, because they know that they can sell those on the pre-owned market for a very high price. So that's why they tend to target those particular models. Of course, if they can, they will also go for extremely expensive watches like Richard Milles, although there's fewer of those. The sort of your normal person in the street wouldn't normally wear one. However, you do tend to see more of those in tourist hotspots. So that's where thieves will usually be on the prowl as well.
And what I mean, I'm a Formula One fan, and I know that Lando Norris, one of the McLaren Formula One drivers, he had a Richard Mille watch, and he was stolen. So I know that they do target these very high value watches.
Absolutely.
Are
Yeah, and
there
it's
any?
often from footballers or tennis stars or celebrities who
Yeah.
do own high value watches like that, and who very often, people tend to know their movements as well. So if it's a footballer, people tend to know when they're away from home because they're away for games. So the house will be left empty, and that's obviously a good moment for the thieves to strike, especially if there is not particularly good security in the house. So that's how those sorts of watches tend to get targeted.
And obviously, it's important to be aware of our our personal security when we're out and about. What are the common tactics that thieves employ to try and take these watches?
So we see lots of street robberies from just ordinary watch owners, people in the street, and those tend to be sort of carried out through sleight of hand or distraction techniques. So you may have heard of the Rolex Rippers, who were operating in the southern counties of the UK over the last sort of 6 to 12 months, and they were targeting people who were very much in their, elderly men wearing their expensive watches, who were in their element, so they were comfortable, they had their guard let down, and that was in golf courses or in supermarket car parks, places basically where these people would never think to be targeted. And so they basically became very prone to anyone who was looking to approach them with those sorts of distraction techniques. So that's how watches very commonly get stolen. We've also seen a lot of very violent thefts as well. So moped-enabled thefts, where people come in on the thieves come in on a scooter, often with weapons. Sometimes the victims, unfortunately, try to fight the thieves and keep hold of their watches, and they get extremely injured in the process. So that's another thing to be aware of. So really keep that watch hidden when it's on the street. But another really common modus operandi recently is theft by means of fraud, and that is primarily happening through online transactions. So, for example, people who have looking to sell a watch, and they've found a potential purchaser online through a platform like eBay or Facebook Marketplace or Gumtree, and some of those sites do enable the buyer and the seller to meet in person and to complete the transaction, and so there's no real safeguards around the transaction itself. And again, through sleight of hand, we might find that a watch that's paid for in cash is at the last minute swapped for fake cash, or potentially once the goods are handed over, the transaction is reversed, and so the seller is basically left without the money or the watch. So that is very, very common, and jewelers are also being targeted with this. So they have buyers who claim the watch that they've purchased from them has never arrived, for example, in the post, or that it turned out to be a fake and they've requested a charge back. So this is super, super common at the moment, and largely actually a result as well of the pandemic and transactions moving online.
So probably sensible for members of the public selling or buying watches to be either buying from reputable auction houses or from reputable dealers.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Well, what sort of effect has the pandemic had on the spate of watch thefts that we've seen recently?
So, in the first few weeks of the pandemic, so the first, I would say, probably um, at least the first 6 weeks or so, there was a significant drop in crime levels because we used to, for example, see at least one high value watch robbery in the street in central West London. It's a robbery unit in the police that reports to us extremely regularly, as you can imagine. People around that area of Knightsbridge, for example, wearing high value watches, and that figure dropped to one watch stolen in the first 5 weeks of the lockdown. So that just goes to show how few street robberies there were at the time. We also saw a big drop in the number of house burglaries because obviously everyone was at home, so
Mhm.
houses weren't being left empty anymore. And again, like I said earlier, so transactions moved online, so there was this proliferation of different types of scams and frauds that were occurring online, some of which were very, very sophisticated. So people potentially being contacted by scammers online or over the phone. And there was sort of two very interesting MOs that we saw emerge over the last 2 to 3 years. So one of which was a repair fraud scam. I don't know if you'd heard of this before, but this is where a watch dealership is contacted by highly sophisticated individuals who know a lot about watches, are very credible, and they persuade them to hand over watches for a servicing. But it turns out those individuals don't in fact have a servicing store. They're scammers and they make off with the goods and are never to be seen again. And there's quite a few stores that were targeted with that particular scam. Another one being elderly fraud, which we've seen many instances of recently, where an older person is contacted by phone by crooks who basically take them to a luxury watch store and persuade them to take part in what the person believes is a sting operation against the store, and they think they're helping police or bank staff, but they're basically persuaded to buy very high value watches, potentially losing their entire life savings. So it's a really sad sorts of thefts that are occurring, and all of these are sort of have increased over the last few years, and also particularly since the pandemic.
And I think we all like to think that we'd never fall foul to any of those scams, but it happens on an alarmingly frequent basis, doesn't it?
Definitely, yeah, and I think stores now have protocols in place to safeguard against this, and they're able to, they train their staff to know if an elderly person comes in, for example, and doesn't really know what they're looking for. They go directly for a watch which doesn't really fit their profile. It seems quite strange that they'd be buying a watch like this. They immediately alert the police and take the elderly person to a safe place in order to prevent these thefts occurring.
Brilliant. So, if you have had your watch stolen, what should you do? What are the first few steps that you should take?
So the very first thing to do is to contact us and provide us with the serial number of the watch and details of the incident. That way we can put the watch on our database straight away, because the really crucial thing is just to get it registered with us as soon as possible, so without delay, because watches can be resold within hours. Of course, if there is a violent incident that has taken place, you want to contact the police straight away, and that is absolutely crucial to do in any instance of theft anyway. You want to get hold of a crime reference number from the police. That can sometimes take a couple of days to come through, the crime reference number. So send that over to us after you've reported the initial theft to us, so that we can then add that crime reference number as your proof of loss. So those are really the crucial steps to do. Report to us, report to the police. If possible, also report to the manufacturer as well. They maintain their own internal databases of stolen watches, and they check those watches when they come in for servicing. So there is a chance that a watch can also flag up at the point it goes to the manufacturer for a service.
And probably another top tip to anyone listening is make a note of the serial numbers of your watches. Keep them somewhere safe, because if you don't have the box and the paperwork at home you can refer to, then you're stuck and you don't know what the serial number is, so you can't report it.
That's exactly it. It's the only way that we'll find the watch again. And I think it's quite a good practice to take digital photos of your watch, your paperwork, keep copies of it in electronic form. So just send yourself an email with, a photo of the paperwork, your receipt, images of you wearing the watch, and all of that will be proof of ownership, and it's something that you won't lose. As well, when you keep the watches in the house, keep the watch itself separate to the box and papers, so that if you do suffer a house burglary, the thieves won't easily make off with the watch and the paperwork intact.
Brilliant. That's great advice. How often do you actually find stolen watches? How often do you come across them, and how do you go about tracking them down?
So we find about 3 or so every day. So it's quite a high number. This year so far, we've had, I think, a total of 320 watches that we've located to date, which were either lost, stolen, implicated in fraud, or fakes as well. That's another area that we cover. And we've actually already successfully recovered 90 watches this year so far. So actually completed the recovery on those. And in terms of how we actually go about finding them, so this is basically through our international search operations on the market, on the pre-owned market. So through dealerships, through pawnbrokers, through private individuals who check watches with us, auction houses. And usually we find watches when they're being offered for sale by an innocent purchaser. So sometimes you will find that someone who is connected to the crime is actually offering them for sale, but most often it will be someone who's completely unaware that they are stolen. They've fallen victim to purchasing that watch themselves, so they will usually look to seek compensation from their seller, and we will take steps to recover the watch by liaising with the victim, the police, the insurer, as well as the trader who we found the watch with and their seller, and basically look to get the watch back to the rightful owner or find a settlement if the current holder is acting in good faith and, for example, many years have passed since the theft. So really there we assess the facts of the claim, the strength of either side's claim, but ultimately we're looking to get the best possible result for the victim.
Brilliant. So, for the benefit of our listeners, as an auction house, we subscribe to the Art Loss Register and to the Watch Register. Now, you have a service where you check every watch that we sell as an auction house. Just tell us a little bit about that and how that works.
Yes, absolutely. So we check auction catalogues about 2 to 3 weeks before the sale. We'll routinely check the lots above a standard value of £1,000 against our database, and that means that when the sale takes place, we've already given the all clear to the auction house that none of those items are registered with us. If there is any item that is a potential issue that is reported on our database, then we'll notify yourselves as the auction house well in advance of that, and we'll look to clarify if there is indeed a claim to the watch, and if there is, then it would be withdrawn from the sale so that it's not sold to an unsuspecting customer.
Brilliant. So that's really great peace of mind for anybody buying from us or any of the other auction houses that are members of the Watch Register, giving them confidence that what they're buying is genuine and isn't stolen as well. So you must have some really exciting recovery stories. Can you share a couple of those with us?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we've got hundreds of cases going on at any one time. I think recently, as I said, watches are turning up quicker than ever before. And this last few months, we've seen lots and lots of watches which have turned up actually within a few days of the theft. And those are really exciting cases for us because the person selling them is probably either the thief or closely connected to the crime. So just to give one example, last week we found 2 watches which had been stolen just the weekend before. And so it was a part of a house burglary that took place on Saturday night. And we found one watch on the Wednesday and another watch from the same theft on the Thursday. So that was obviously fantastic intelligence to pass on to the police. But this is actually quite common now that these sorts of cases are happening. It's also really rewarding for us when we're finding watches from fairly old thefts as well. So there was, for example, a major theft that has been registered with us was a theft from a trailer. It was from a distribution center in 2018 in Birmingham, and about 1,000 watches were stolen. And over the years, we've located lots of watches from that same theft. And in the last couple of months, we've found another 3 or 4 of those. And again, so it's really nice to sort of see these watches still surfacing. But also, I guess the ones that really excite us as well are the international cases. So where you see the movement of the watch around the globe, fairly quickly as well. So a recent case was just last month where we found a watch that had been stolen from a Danish citizen in Spain when he was on holiday, and it turned up in Germany, and we completed that recovery just within a month. So again, that was quite a quick turnaround time. Sometimes cases can take many, many years to resolve, whereas this one was completed fairly quickly.
So you've worked in the watch industry for quite some time now. What sort of surprising things could you tell our listeners about, about watch theft, for example?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years, especially as insurance fraud has proliferated, has been people trying to gain 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 times the value of one watch. So, for example, making multiple insurance claims for a watch that was stolen, which they stole or which is fake. Sometimes they're buying paperwork online and then using that to make a claim for a watch which they never owned. So that's a real big problem now for insurers, and they've very much cottoned onto this. And one of our insurer clients suspects that actually 50% of their claims are fraudulent, which is actually a really high figure. In terms of the recovery side, it has been interesting to see as well how the fact that checks are being carried out on the market has actually prevented some people from looking to resell a watch that they know is stolen. So we had a case recently where a lady had a watch stolen from her during a party in her house. She thinks she knows who did it, and about a year later she was clearing the garden and found a bin bag basically wrapped up under a pile of leaves, and she found her watch there inside the bag. So obviously the person who'd taken it had got cold feet, realized that the watch was too hot to handle, and had just thrown it back over the fence and returned it. And we had also a similar case a couple of years back where a watch was stolen from a block of flats by a maintenance worker. There were actually 2 incidents like that in the same building. We found the first watch, and in the second case, the maintenance worker returned the watch anonymously because they knew that these checks were being done and the watches were being found, and they didn't want to be detected.
Wow, those are amazing stories. And have you ever come across fake watches that have had real serial numbers applied to them?
Yes, that happens a lot, in fact. So when we work in the realm of fakes, we do register serial numbers on our database that are associated with fake watches. However, we'll never say to the person who's checking that watch, if it does flag up as a match, that the one that they have in their possession is definitely fake. We will basically share with them the information that we have on the database, but essentially we don't physically inspect the watches ourselves, and we're not experts in authenticity, so we won't ever make a final decision on that. We will allow them to do that, but we will pass information to them on, for example, parts of the watch which may be fake, whereas others may be genuine. So to give an example, we registered a watch which a pawnbroker had inspected and found that it had a fake movement inside. A month later, that same serial number was searched with us by someone who's looking to buy that watch. They would have only looked at the outside case, which appeared to all be genuine. And so we told them to have a look inside, and indeed they found that the movement inside was fake. So they avoided buying that watch. So it's absolutely the case that, serial numbers are repeated on multiple watches. It's something that people need to be aware of, but we do also proactively register cases where we know that serial numbers are used on fake watches.
And how would the end user go about checking a watch that they're interested in buying or they're interested in selling, etc.? How do they go about contacting you and checking that watch?
It's very easy to do. So they just submit the brand, model, and serial number through our website. And as soon as we have that information, then we process the check, and we will issue a certificate for the watch that they've searched. So that certificate basically serves as their proof of due diligence. It allows them to demonstrate that they're acting in good faith when it comes to the purchase. And alternatively, if we do find a match with the watch, we will not issue a certificate, but we will contact them straight away, and we will provide them with details of the loss and evidence of the loss as well. And we'll take further steps in order to secure the watch and establish who's offering it for sale, and then make a recovery if possible.
Brilliant. And I think lastly, do you have any words of advice for buyers, collectors, just on how to safeguard themselves?
Yes, absolutely. So, like we spoke about earlier, the first thing to do is record the serial number of your watch, keep that safe. Also, keep your watch out of sight, especially when in public places or in the street. So, thieves, this is their whole career. They're professionals, and they have their eye out on people's wrists at all times. So, don't show your watch, don't flaunt it when you're in the street. Maybe put it on, but keep it covered, or put it on when you get to wherever you're going, where you do want to maybe show it off at that point. And make sure you have the watch insured as well. So ideally you have insurance both inside the house, but also outside of the house. And when you're traveling, that's really, really important.
So we've seen recently with the meteoric rise in the second-hand prices of particularly Rolex and Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe that watches are often selling for 3 or 4 times more than they would cost new from the authorised dealers. So how should watch collectors and watch owners approach the insurance side of things?
So an insurance valuation will normally be done at the point that the policy is taking out. But as you say, watches and indeed many luxury assets can increase in value over time. So at the point that they then surface after loss, they could well be two or 3 or 4 times the value that they were before. What insurers and what we will do is actually normally look at the current market value of the item, because that is what it can currently be resold for. And that is also what an insurer, if they look to recover an item, they would resell it for. Equally, a victim, if they were able to buy the watch back from the insurer at the price that it was initially insured for, they could then resell it later on for a much higher price. But I do think insurers who know that these watches are going up may be reluctant to resell a watch back to a policyholder for the price that it was originally insured for, given that now it has increased so much in value. So one of the things we ask people to do is actually, if they are interested in getting the watch back itself after a loss, is to register it with us, even if their insurer has reported it to us. That way, when we find the watch, we will notify both them and the insurer, so that then they can have a conversation with their insurer about getting it back.
Brilliant. So it's important to make sure that your watch is properly insured and the insurance valuation is up to date as well. And the
Absolutely.
insurance company knows exactly what you've got. We had a case recently where the client had lost a Rolex and it was insured at the retail price. But to go and, there was a 3 or 4 year waiting list for him to buy that watch from the dealer. So for
Mm,
him to go and replace it, he had to spend twice the retail price to buy another one.
mm,
So it's really important to make sure your insurance valuations are up to date and they're recent.
absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, Katya, thank you so much today, for joining us today. I think hopefully it's been really informative for our listeners, learning all about the services that the Art Loss Register and the Watch Register can provide.
Thank you so much for having me, Aubrey. Good to speak to you.
Brilliant. And you, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
To listen to more episodes like this, you can find our podcast on all major streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you can follow us on social media across all platforms using the handle @Dawson's Auctions.